All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm Torbjorn, your instructor. Welcome back to Going from Zero to Producer in 90 Days with Ableton Live. Today, our lesson's all about scales and chords. We're going to get a little bit more use out of the sounds and instruments categories that we were looking at in our last lesson. We obviously get the sounds for free with the program, but we've got to pick the notes. And so today is all about figuring out how to do that. Want to make sure that we've got good chords in our song. I always think about piano when I'm thinking about chords. Piano is the instrument that Ableton uses to represent MIDI. A thing called piano roll is really common. All right, let's review what we did in lesson 4. We're experimenting with synthesizers and MIDI effects. Learned about the basic things that make up a synthesizer: oscillator, filter, envelope, LFO. Then we dove into some MIDI effects: arpeggiator, chord, pitch, and velocity. All right, so let's dive into it today. We're talking about scales and chords. And well, before we can really talk about that, we need to figure out what our key signature is, because that determines the scale. Probably heard this phrase before. This song is in the key of... Well, let's talk about what that means. In Western music, we've got 12 notes. If we look here at our handy-dandy piano, we can see 2 octaves of those same notes. C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, all the way back to C. That makes a whole octave. You can see those black keys have 2 notes on them, actually. C sharp and D flat occupy the same key. It means the same thing. It's just a different name for the same note. Depending on what notes you have in your scale, you might want to express that as C sharp or D flat. We could talk a little bit more about that later, but it's just different words for the same thing. So the key of the song that we're in tells us what notes to play, and it gives us a better idea of what chords and melodies are going to sound the most musically natural together. And what I mean by musically natural is that there's not going to be any dissonances. There's not going to be any unpleasant sounding things. They're all going to feel like they fit together in the same piece of music. In most pop and dance music, which is kind of what we're covering in these lessons, we're mainly using 2 different types of scales, and that's major and minor. I wrote natural minor in the notes. You might also see harmonic minor, but major and minor. And what that means is major key is kind of like a happy sound, should be uplifting and resolved. We'll talk about this WWH business here in just a sec. And if you're in a minor key, it more or less just means that it's like sad and kind of dramatic sounding. Let's pop over to Ableton and let's take a listen to a major scale. So you guys will recognize this from choir if you ever did any vocals in school, or maybe you heard it in like a music movie or something like that. It's this idea of do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. That is the sound of a major scale. And if we start on the C note, it sounds like this. You got the C major chord to start. And after the C major chord played through the scale, let's hear that one more time. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. If we were to switch to the minor scale, still starting on that C note, but it's going to sound a little bit different. And let's take a listen to that. It's like a subtle change, but when we're using those 2 different scales as like the foundation for a whole piece of music, it's going to make a really, really big difference. All right, I want to zoom in here. I'm going to double click on my C major scale clip that I made here, and we can actually see the note names that are in this. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, all the way back to C. You can see that we skipped some notes here. In fact, it was all the black keys didn't get played at all. And that is because there's no sharps and no flats in the key of C. So we start with our C, our root note. We skip up one whole step as opposed to a half step, or in Ableton terms, a whole tone instead of a semitone. And so if you look back here to this WWH thing that we skipped over a little bit earlier, so that's our first W, whole step. C all the way up to D. And then we get another W, so we're doing another whole step. We're skipping over that black key again to E. And now from E to F, that's a half step. You can see there's no black key in between those keys on the piano. Another whole step to G. Another whole step to A. Whole step to B. And then a half step up to our last note, C. Whole, half. Whole, half. We could go and compare that minor key as well. Still starting on a C for our minor scale. Whole step, and then we get a half step. So instead of going all the way up to an E, we go from a D to a D sharp, or in this case, we would call it an E flat so that we don't say the same letter name twice. F, G, whole, and a half step, and here we get our G sharp or our A flat, A sharp or a B flat, C. That's our minor scale. Hopefully that makes sense. It's like the foundation of some pretty important stuff, and it's what we need to know so that we can move on to making chords. So when two notes are played at the same time, the relationship between those two notes is referred to as harmony. And when harmony happens, it means that there is a chord. Depending on what those two notes are, that type of chord will have a different name, it will have a different sound. There's a lot of different chords when you start combining notes, but the ones that we're going to be looking at today are called diatonic triads. It's the fancy name for diatonic, meaning that they're notes that are all in the same key signature, and triad meaning that it's three notes. So we're going to pick a key and we're going to use three notes from that key to make a chord. So in every scale, we've got 7 of these chords. They each start from a different note in the scale. And we're going to look at a trick here to figure out what the notes are and how to play them. So I just wanted to show you a trick that'll make this easier. I've made this MIDI clip here, and if we zoom all the way out to the left before bar 1, I just added a note on all of the white keys. Just double clicking here, or if you have your pencil tool with the B key, that works. And then I just selected all of these, made that funky sound. Selected all of these notes and pressed the left key. And now they're behind the bar so that they're not going to get played when we play this MIDI clip. But if I hit this fold button, then now the only notes that we're going to see that we can add are in the key of C. I'm actually going to shift this up an octave and do the same thing so that we get 2 octaves of notes, because we're going to combine a couple different notes here to make chords. So all you got to do is you pick your root note of your chord, and that gives the chord its letter name. So we could start on C or D or E, and then we're going to add that note, and then all we have to do to make a triad off of that is we're going to skip the next note in the scale. So we're not going to play a D, but we will play an E, because that's the third 3 notes above where we started. And then we're going to add a 5th as well. So same trick, we're skipping our F, and we're just going to add a G. And now if we play these together, we get a C major chord. Now how do we know if it's going to be a major chord? Well, here's a trick. The relationship between the first and the third note, depending on the distance between the first note and the third note, it's going to determine if it's a major or a minor. So if they're 3 semitones apart, you get a minor third. And if they're 4 semitones apart, you get a major third. If we unfold our MIDI clip and look back at that, then let's count those notes between that. C to E, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 semitones. So that's how we know that's a major third. That major third has that sound. If we were to shift it down to have it be only 3 semitones above, that's the minor third sound. We'll stick with major now because we're just going to put everything only in the key of C. So let's look at starting it on a different note. E. E is a minor chord. You'll see that there's a couple different ways that we can represent that. Sometimes people use numbers. Scale degree is what that's called, 1 through 7. The problem with the number system, that doesn't give us enough information. If we have the ability to use like the Roman numerals, then we can capitalize or lowercase it if it's a major or a minor chord. So this E chord here, lowercase Roman numeral 3, tells us that that's a minor chord. So let's build an E chord. So we're starting on an E. We're going to do our skip trick from earlier. So we're skipping the F, and the third note above that E is going to be a G. And then again above that, we're skipping our A, and we're going to put it on B. So that's the sound of that chord. Let's unfold it, count the semitones. So E, F, F sharp, G. That's 3 semitones. So that's how we can double check that the sound of this chord is in fact a minor chord sound. Take a screenshot of this cheat sheet if you want to. You can easily Google the minor key one. We're going to look at more minor key composition in another video. So we're just going to stick to major key now. But that's all you got to do. So you can pick a series of numbers and you can create a chord progression off of that. 1, 4, 5, 1, 5, 6, 4 is a common one. 2, 5, 1 is common in a lot of jazz music. Just try out different combinations of these numbers and build those chords and see how that works for you. So let's take a listen through the whole C major chords, what all of those chords sound like. C all the way through B diminished. I'll fold that real quick so we can see all the note names. I just want to point out 2 particularly special chords that show up in this, and that is the 5 chord, which is a major chord, but we call it a dominant chord, or the number that represents that on the chord symbol is 5 with a 7 over it. And when we start extending chords and making 4-note chords, which we're going to do in a lesson very soon, that 4-note chord has a special property that makes it like extra good at resolving a chord progression from the 5 chord back to the 1 chord. The other special chord is the 7 chord, which in this case is B. And what's special about that B diminished 7 chord is that I'm going to unfold our notes here and take a look at it. Naturally, that one has 3 semitones between the first and the third. And then it should be 4 semitones, but 1 chord in this scale naturally occurs this funny way. And it gives us this diminished sound. It's kind of, it's a resolution chord like the 5 chord. You can go back to the 1 chord with it, but it has kind of some like tension, little bit of like uncomfortable feeling that comes with that chord. So you don't hear it a lot in pop music, but it can be cool. Now it's time to break some rules. You've earned it. You've listened to me ramble on about all these weird rules about diatonic chords and semitones and is it a major and is it a minor. That is a strong foundation to understand that stuff. And I know from experience that it really comes in handy, but it's not always how you want to think about making music. Sometimes you want to just throw some ideas out there and then you can figure out what type of chord it is later. We're going to throw all of that music theory out the window for a minute. We're going to look at some fast ways to make chords with Ableton that sound really cool. Even though it breaks most of the rules, it's still a totally valid way to make music. So the first thing that we're going to do here is I've grabbed this drum beat off of Looperman. It's called Rhodes Drum by Noki. And it goes a little something like this. Kind of a UK garage style drum beat. And then I went into sounds and I went to guitar and plucked, and I found this Guitar Palm Legacy thing. Pretty cool sounding instrument. The only thing that I changed is I took the echo and the ambience all the way down to almost all the way down to 0. I'm actually going to take it all the way down to 0 because I just want the totally dry sound. And all I did was I added a bunch of notes, made this MIDI clip here, and I did a little trick where I switched it to a 16th grid. And instead of adding things that were 2 or 4 beats long, I did 3. And so we get this kind of weird 3/4 polyrhythm thing. And then you just got to find one note in here because it doesn't if you do all 3s, you get this awkward space at the end of 2. So all you got to do is find one spot where it's kind of like, could be cool to shift it over and have one short note. Kind of a weird explanation, but all I'm really doing is finding a good rhythm. That's what's important for this trick. We got to start with a rhythm. That rhythm sounds like this. Pretty simple. The drums are doing the most of the work. We can find the right octave. Maybe it's better if we select all and shift and press our up arrow key. I'm going to do it at a higher octave for now because we're going to make some chords out of this and it could be cool to have them be real bright. All right, so now we're just going to mess around with some MIDI effects. I think the first one definitely should be a random. So all this is going to do is it's going to take our note and then it's going to pick another random note. And the amount of times that it picks a random note is determined by us turning this chance knob up. So let's start it at 50. And then it's going to find a new note, and it's either going to go up if we have the add thing selected, it's going to go down if we have the sub, or if we select a by, I believe it'll go both ways. So let's select by, and it'll make some notes go higher, make some notes go lower. Let's see how that sounds. So that's cool. Now we're getting some variation. We still only have one note in our MIDI clip, so that's pretty easy. The problem is that some of these notes are kind of ugly sounding and we can't necessarily control because it's set to random. So what we can do is we can go here to our scale and we can pick a scale from our presets. I'm going to pick C major, and all it's going to do is it's going to give us this grid. So you imagine that the note that you play, it shows up down here on the bottom. We've got our white keys and our black keys. And then this grid on the up and down axis is what note it's going to make your note actually play. So here, there's a chance that it could pick all these other random notes because of this random effect. And then this scale effect is going to kind of like lock everything into the correct key. Okay, so now all of a sudden we kind of like have this melody emerging, and it's still random and it's going to play back different every time, but it's sounding more musical, which is cool. So that's all great. We've got our notes figured out. It's playing in the right key. It's moving around for us. Now we need to actually make this thing a chord. So let's grab the chord MIDI effect. I believe there's one here that's called major chord. Let's just start with that. So it's going to take our first note and it's going to duplicate it by every time that we add this shift. So here in this preset, it's got the first one shifted up 4 semitones. Remember from our earlier in this lesson, we learned that that makes a major third. And then +7 is in reference to the initial note, and that's what's going to make the 5th. So now we have a MIDI effect that takes one note and it turns it into that 3-note triad for us. Sounded like some a 90s video game or something like that. That's cool. I'm not super big on the major chord sound, so maybe we'll take that first shift and we'll just put it down to +3, and now we should get some minor chords. Already sounding way more musical. For me personally, I like the sound of those dramatic minor chords, and even though it's not in key because it's only playing minor chords, and so it's going to play some chords and some notes out of key, I still like the sound of it, and that's what's important. May even be worth bringing some of that ambience back in. So that's cool, but we still have the problem of that it's playing back randomly every time. And the trick to get around that is to make a new MIDI track, and we're going to actually record those notes into a new MIDI track. So here I've made a new MIDI track. I've called it MIDI Resample. And you have to select the input. So if I go here, I can set the input of this track. You can see I've got all these other sources that can give it MIDI information. And I'm going to select the guitar track. I'm going to hit record. And then I'm going to hit the arrangement record. And it'll start recording a new MIDI clip. And it's not going to record audio. It's going to record the MIDI notes. And so we're creating that same rhythm, but it's randomizing the notes. It's keeping them in scale, and then it's adding 2 additional notes to make a chord. And so what we're going to do is we're going to record all of that randomness, and then we're going to find some little sections that we like, and we're going to spit those back into the original sound. I'm just going to let it go through the whole thing, so we've got lots of stuff to work with. Cool. Lots of cool ideas in there. Now we can just start chopping them up. So we can actually take this instrument. I'm going to hold my Alt key, or if you're on Windows, hold your Control key, and you'll be able to copy it. And let's just mute this original one. We're kind of done with this one that's got all the weird MIDI effects on it for now. Because we've recorded these notes, it's going to play back the same way every time now. And so all we got to do is find a little spot, press our Command E, and we can make some chops, and we can start moving these things around. I'm going to make a new dummy MIDI track here just so we can keep track of all the parts that we want to keep. All right, so now we've made a little Frankenstein like amalgamation here. So I want to just go here and select all of these, and Command J will make it one MIDI clip again. And let's go ahead and just double check that we didn't get any weird stuff, like listen back to the whole thing and make sure that it sounds good on a loop. Even the notes that got chopped off in that MIDI clip in kind of weird ways ended up being cool. And so you can imagine that there's all different ways that you can do this. Try it with different sound presets. Try it with different notes. Try it with different scales and different chords. Move those settings around on the MIDI effect that's called random to get different results there as well. Because I feel like that's a big part of what is going to create your chord progression. That's kind of choosing how the notes change for you. So you definitely want to finesse that one and make sure that it works exactly the way that you want it to, and it's giving you lots of cool sounding stuff. But just as a quick review, just talking about music theory, diatonic triads, major and minor keys, how to build those scales and how to build chords off of those scales. We're going to be diving a lot more into this and using these terms a lot. So make sure you familiarize yourself with all of that stuff. Hope you guys are making some great music out there and having lots of fun. Thanks again to Ableton for the free trial. We'll see you in the next lesson.